My girlfriend said I was the father, but I found out the baby was her dad's, and her mom begged me to stay silent for the family name. I always thought that the worst thing that could happen to me in a relationship was to be cheated on with someone else, to be blatantly lied to, or to be laughed at in my own face. But it never crossed my mind that my worst nightmare would come wrapped in something that, at first, seemed like a blessing, a pregnancy. It all started on a Friday afternoon, after I left work. I am a carpenter. I work in a family workshop that we inherited from my grandfather, so by that time I was already covered in dust, with my fingernails black from dried varnish and exhaustion marking my back. As soon as I crossed the apartment door, I saw Paula, my girlfriend of more than 5 years, sitting on the sofa as if she were waiting for me, with teary eyes and one of those trembling smiles that you do not know if they are from fear or happiness. I approached quickly, thinking something bad had happened, but before I could ask her anything, she blurted it out, with a broken voice, that she was pregnant. She said, "We need to talk. I am pregnant," and my world stopped completely. Instead of feeling fear or bewilderment, what I felt was something more like a rush of euphoria. It had not been in our plans, it is true, but it was not something that caught us completely off guard either. We had been together for years. We already lived under the same roof. We had a stable routine, and more than once we had talked about what we would do if that moment ever came. So I hugged her, lifted her off the sofa, told her I loved her, that we were going to get through it, that she had nothing to worry about. That same night, I ordered pizza, bought a small cake, put a random candle on top that was left over from my last birthday, and we toasted with a bottle of cheap wine that we had been saving for an occasion that never came. I called my mother, told her, and she cried on the phone with emotion. My sister wrote to me a little later to tell me that she was already thinking of giving me diapers as punishment for being the first to make her an aunt. During the first few days, everything was happiness. Paula showed me the app with the weeks of gestation. We talked about names, whether we wanted to know the sex or not, and we even looked at some houses in the outskirts because we were going to run out of space. I was so devoted to that moment that I did not notice the small details that, if I had been more attentive, might have alerted me from the very beginning. For example, when she showed me the ultrasound for the first time, I felt excited, of course, but something did not quite add up in my head. The date at the bottom of the image was earlier than the last time we had had relations, by at least a couple of weeks. At the time, I thought it was a scanner error, that maybe the doctors had done the exam with an incorrect reference date, or that the clinic software was not updating properly. Not for a second did I want to suspect anything else. I swallowed my doubt like someone swallows a thorn just so as not to ruin the moment, but the discomfort grew like an itch on the back of my neck. And things got even stranger when, a couple of weeks later, Paula's father came to visit us. One of those men who go through life in a suit, even when it is hot, with a smile of someone who thinks he owns everything and a tone of voice that sounds as if he were giving orders to the world. He was always cordial with me, I do not deny that, but he was never really close. That afternoon he arrived with a bottle of whiskey, said he wanted to toast to the good news, and what disturbed me most was not the gift or the way he hugged his daughter, but the way he looked at her. Not like a proud father, not with that tenderness I have seen in my uncles when my cousin got pregnant, but with a strange, uncomfortable intensity, like someone observing something that belongs to them. Then he patted her on the back, not even on the shoulder, but lower down, and whispered something in her ear that I could not hear. Paula laughed nervously and then stood up abruptly to go to the kitchen, as if wanting to cut the moment short. That night I said nothing. I went to bed with a heavy feeling in my chest, as if something were out of place, and I did not quite know what it was. Paula fell asleep quickly, but I spent hours staring at the ceiling, mulling over that damned gesture, that contact, the timeline that made less and less sense to me. I did not know if I was being paranoid, if I was exaggerating things, if it was simply the stress of taking on such a big responsibility, but I no longer felt calm, and what followed only worsened that discomfort. Paula began to avoid talking about the pregnancy with as much enthusiasm as at the beginning. She told me she was very tired, that she did not want to argue, that she was irritable because of her hormones. When I asked her if she could accompany me to a medical appointment because I wanted to be present for everything, she told me it was not necessary, that it was just a routine checkup, that she did not want me to worry about it. I began to feel that every answer came with a prefabricated excuse, with a rehearsed smile, as if she were repeating a script that not even she believed. And that is when everything began to fall apart. What I would discover later would not only make me vomit with disgust, but would forever change the way I trust, the way I look at people who call themselves family, because what I discovered was that the child I thought would be mine, that baby for whom I had imagined changing diapers, sleepless nights, and stroller rides in the park, was actually the son of my girlfriend's father. And the most repulsive thing of all is that her mother, yes, Paula's mother, had the audacity to come and beg me to keep quiet for the sake of the family name, as if I were a mere actor in this sick play they were determined to maintain. But what they did not know is that I was not born to stay quiet, much less when it comes to something so rotten, because there are things that cannot be covered up with money, or with pleas, or with false appearances, and this story is just beginning. Update 1. Almost 4 weeks had passed since that night when I began to notice that something in this whole supposed pregnancy did not add up, for weeks in which, little by little, my head became a tangle of thoughts that did not let me sleep well, that made me look at Paula with a mixture of tenderness, doubt, and resentment, as if deep down I knew something was wrong, but I resisted accepting it. I clung to the idea that I had to trust, that I could not let myself be carried away by sick theories or assumptions without proof. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself of that, every detail that came to light ended up sinking me further. The tension in the house was evident, and although Paula pretended that everything was still the same, I was no longer the same. My gaze was no longer the same, my silence either. One night, while she was sleeping soundly after saying she had a terrible migraine and therefore did not want to have dinner, I stealthily went down to the building's garbage. I felt like a wretch rummaging through waste. I admit it, but something had told me that I would find more than one answer there, and I was not mistaken. Among snack wrappers, shopping receipts, and an open cereal box, I found a small white box, crumpled, torn in one corner, but with a word in large letters, pregnancy test. I examined it carefully, as if I were defusing a bomb. It was used, and next to it were 2 others, all with a clearly negative result. Negative. I did not hesitate to take pictures of them with my cell phone, focusing well on the expiration date, the exact model, and everything that could serve as proof. Then I went back up with my heart beating so hard I thought it was going to explode in my chest. I locked myself in the bathroom with my stomach in knots, feeling a mixture of anger and disappointment that made me want to scream. I clenched my teeth, washed my face, and when I looked at myself in the mirror, I understood that I had to go deeper. The next morning, Paula woke up in a good mood, as if nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, told me she had slept better, and that she was going to go see her mother for a couple of hours. I seized the moment. As soon as she closed the door, I took the ultrasound she had shown me weeks ago, the same one she had placed in a picture frame on the hallway table. I took a picture of it, changed my clothes, took a taxi, and went directly to a private clinic where my sister-in-law had given birth months before. There, a very kind elderly nurse received me, who at first thought I was going for a consultation, but when I explained to her, in the most desperate tone I have ever used in my life, that I needed to verify if that image corresponded to someone else, she looked at me with compassion. I showed her the photo, and the woman, after a few minutes, asked me to wait. When she returned, her face had changed. She did not give me names, but she was very clear. That ultrasound did not correspond to any patient named Paula in her database, and furthermore, the date did not coincide with any of the prenatal checkup dates they had registered for that month. The most serious thing, she told me, was that that model of machine was not the one they had been using for over a year. In short, that image was not real, or at least it was not Paula's. I returned home feeling like an idiot, with a contained fury that threatened to get out of my hands at any moment. I waited for her to return, sat in the living room with my phone in my hand, and as soon as she entered, I told her we needed to talk. Paula, without understanding anything, sat in front of me, and I told her bluntly that I knew the tests were negative, that the ultrasound was fake, and that something had not added up from the beginning. Her reaction was immediate. She jumped up, started shouting, accused me of being sick, of not trusting her, of making things up out of jealousy, and of ruining an important moment. I told her not to shout at me, that I had proof, that nothing she was saying was an invention, but she did not let me finish. She called me controlling, paranoid, and locked herself in the bathroom crying and throwing things. I stayed outside, sitting on the edge of the sofa, with my hands sweating and my head spinning, not knowing if I had just discovered a monumental lie or if I was going crazy and everything was a damned coincidence. The next day, early, while Paula was still not speaking to me, her mother appeared at the door of the house. She did not knock like a normal visitor. No, she opened it with her copy of the key as if she were still welcome. She entered without greeting me, with red eyes and a bag in her hand, as if she had been crying all night. She asked me to talk in private, not to tell Paula anything, that it was something delicate. Reluctantly, I agreed, more out of curiosity than respect. We sat in the kitchen, and there, without looking at me directly, she began to speak in a trembling voice. She said that everything I suspected was true, that Paula was not pregnant when she told me, that she had been going through a very confusing time and had had a relapse with her father. Just like that, with those words, a damned relapse. I stared at her as if she were speaking another language. She, as if nothing, continued saying that it had been a mistake, that they were ashamed, that they did not know how to handle it, and that Paula, in the midst of her guilt, had thought that inventing a pregnancy could correct what she had done. Then came the part that broke me. Her mother, a woman whom until that moment I had considered a sensible figure, an educated and protective lady, begged me not to make it public. She told me, "Think carefully, son. This would not only destroy her, but the entire family. You know what this surname represents, what her father has built. If this were known, we would all sink." She stared at me with eyes full of supplication, as if I were a judge and her verdict depended on me. She asked me, please, for Paula's love and out of respect for everything we had lived through, to keep quiet. For the sake of the surname, she repeated, as if the surname weighed more than the disgust I felt in my chest. I did not answer her. I just got up, opened the door for her, and stood in the doorway while she left with her head bowed, thanking me for my maturity. Even though I had not said a word, I slammed the door shut, let myself fall to the living room floor with my legs crossed, feeling my stomach churn as if it were full of acid, and there I understood that nothing in my life would ever be the same again, that I had touched something so rotten, so cursed, so disgusting, that there was no turning back. Update 2. Almost 2 months had passed since that conversation in the kitchen with Paula's mother, and although in theory I should have felt clearer, the truth is that I entered a mental state that I do not wish on anyone. I left the house that same week, but not by making scenes or slamming doors, but silently, like someone abandoning a contaminated place they no longer recognize. I did not take many things, just enough not to return. I slept in an apartment that a friend rented me under the table, a tiny place with thin walls and a mattress on the floor that reminded me every day that this was no longer my life. But I did not quite know what the new one was either. I worked longer hours at the workshop, almost obsessively, as if the noise of the saws and the smell of wood could clean the dirt from everything I had discovered, but not even then. The truth is that the disgust had gotten under my skin, and there was no way to tear it off. During that time, Paula's family did not stop writing to me. Her mother, every 2 or 3 days, sent me messages with an absurd mixture of pleas and threats. In one, she told me she understood how I felt and asked for forgiveness for what they had done, but in the next, she warned me that if I thought of defaming her husband or damaging her daughter's image, they would take legal action. I did not answer or delete anything. I saved every message, every audio, every screenshot as if I were building a case file. I realized that I not only had a queasy stomach, I also had anger, a cold, controlled anger that did not shout, but also did not forget. I did not know exactly what I would do with all of it, but I was clear that somehow I was not going to let that family continue smiling in public while inside they were a nest of rot. I began to collect evidence like someone gathering pieces of a story to prove they are not crazy. I dug into old conversations with Paula, looked for photos, checked dates. Then I started thinking more strategically. If I wanted to prove that child was not mine, I needed concrete, irrefutable proof. It was then that I remembered that Paula's father had the habit of using cloth handkerchiefs, one of those old-fashioned gestures that he boasted of as part of his class. And once, during a visit to the workshop months ago, he had left one on my desk. I looked for it among my things, hoping it was still there, and when I found it, I felt my hands tremble. It still had visible traces, a small stain of what was probably sweat or saliva. Who knows? I did not know if it would be useful, but I packed it in a resealable bag and started making calls. After some contacts and much insistence, I found a private laboratory willing to do a comparative genetic analysis without too many questions. They just needed biological samples from both individuals. Getting Paula's toothbrush was more complicated. I had to sneak into the apartment one day when she was not there, using an old copy of the key I still had, and I went in just to take it and leave. I did not touch anything else. I did not confront her. I did not see her. The sound of my own footsteps in that empty apartment, the one that until recently had been our home, was enough for me to feel that I no longer belonged there. The laboratory told me it would take a few weeks. The cost was not low, but at that moment I did not care. I was not thinking with the head of someone who wanted to save money, but with that of someone who needed justice. Not necessarily legal justice, but emotional, personal justice, because I could not live knowing everything I knew and keep it quiet as if I were part of the complicity. While I waited for the results, I started documenting everything. I opened a folder with cloud backup, created notes with dates, wrote a kind of diary with the most important events. I even recorded in my own voice what I had experienced, with specific details that only I knew, not for pleasure, but because I knew that if this ever became public, the last thing I would allow was to be called a liar. And meanwhile, Paula started looking for me again. She did it with that sweet voice she used when she knew she had messed up. She wrote to me saying she missed me, that things had gotten out of control, that what happened with her father had been confusing, that she was sorry, that she wanted to start over. I answered her only once, not to open the door for her, but to make it clear that I knew the truth, that nothing she said was going to change that, and that sooner or later everything would come out. She did not deny it. What she did was respond with another message that I still have saved. I know what I did is unforgivable, but you were also part of my life. Do not destroy me more than I already am. And that left me cold, because she did not speak like someone ashamed or truly repentant, but like someone trying to get pity to get away unscathed. Instead of assuming the monstrosity of her act, she used it as an emotional shield, as if the fact that I had been her partner for 5 years forced me to carry her shame. As if somehow I had the responsibility to protect her after she had made me believe I was going to be the father of a child conceived with her own father. Finally, the day the lab report arrived, I opened it alone in the workshop, my hands trembling so much that the paper fell to the floor. I picked it up and read it twice to be sure. The report said there was a 99.9% genetic match between Paula's and her father's samples, the kind of match that can only occur between a father and his child. It was irrefutable. It was disgustingly true. At that moment, I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not break anything. I just sat on the workbench, took a bottle of water that had been open since morning, and drank it in one gulp. It was raining outside. The workshop smelled of wet wood, and everything felt ironically calm. But inside me, there was no longer any doubt. It was no longer just a suspicion, or a theory, or a sick story that could be swept under the rug. Now I had proof. I had the names, the dates, the objects, the messages, and the damned genetic proof. The only thing I had left to decide was when and how I was going to let everyone know, because this time, silence was not an option. Update 3. A little over 5 months had passed since everything exploded inside me like a damned, uncontrolled fire, although from the outside no one would have noticed. I had become an expert at feigning normality while inside I carried a bomb ready to explode. At first glance, I was still the same guy as always, the one who goes to work with varnish-stained fingernails and comes back with a dirty uniform, the one who orders the same coffee at the same place and pays exactly with crumpled bills. But inside, there was no trace left of the person I was before Paula told me she was pregnant, and it showed, even if no one had the courage to ask it out loud. The height of it all was that, despite the estrangement, the evidence I had, the silence I had imposed on that entire family, one day I received an invitation to a kind of family and intimate lunch at her parents' house. The invitation was not direct, of course, because they knew that if they spoke to me face to face, I would probably tell them to go to hell without thinking twice. But they used my mother. They called her, told her they were trying to rebuild the family, that they did not want things to end badly, and that the least they could do was invite me to lunch to talk with maturity. And my mother, knowing nothing because I never told her the truth, not her or anyone else so as not to hurt her, called me excited, believing that perhaps I was about to reconcile, that maybe I was going to get back with Paula, and that the supposed pregnancy was now more real than ever. At first I thought about refusing. In fact, I was clear for several days. I was not going to go. But then, something inside me changed. I understood that it was not a simple meal, it was an opportunity. If they thought they could continue their charade, I was going to sit in the front row, but this time with the lights on and the recorder on. I owed them no respect, no compassion, not one more damned silence. So I said yes. I went to lunch. I dressed as if nothing was wrong. I even brought a bottle of cheap wine as if that were a sign that I was open to dialogue. And I arrived at that house with the most calculated calm I have ever had. In the inside pocket of my jacket, I had my phone recording since before I got out of the car. I could not afford to miss a single second of what was said there. When I arrived, Paula's mother was the first to open the door. She hugged me as if nothing had happened, as if I were still her future son-in-law, as if she herself had not begged me not to expose her family. Paula appeared shortly after in a loose dress, one of those that women wear to look pregnant when they are not, or to hide that they never were. Her expression was soft, measuredly sad, like someone who wants to elicit pity but still has control. I just smiled, nodded, and acted as if I were there out of goodwill. Her father, on the other hand, appeared with his same air of an overconfident businessman, as if he believed himself invincible, untouchable, owner of everything he touched. He shook my hand firmly and told me he appreciated that I had had the maturity to attend. He said it like that, looking me straight in the eye, as if he were congratulating me for being a good dog that behaves well. Inside, every word he directed at me was one more spark in the gunpowder I had been accumulating for months. We sat at the table, elegant food, soft music, fake smiles. Everything prepared so that the scene would look like some kind of civilized reconciliation. After the second course, Paula's father stood up with his glass in his hand and said he wanted to make a toast. He said the family had been through difficult times, that Paula was stronger than ever, that the baby was on the way, and that he, as a grandfather and father, felt blessed to see us together again. At that moment, Paula took my hand under the table. She did not look at me, she just squeezed it tightly. Maybe she thought that way I would follow the script, that I would also make a toast and raise my glass as if everything were true. But I did not. I just left my glass on the table and pretended to be dizzy. I stood up carefully, put on an uncomfortable face, and asked permission to go to the bathroom. I walked straight to the house's library, that small room where Paula's father kept his books, his diplomas, his antique desk, and above all, his well-placed ego. I made sure to close the door. Minutes later, as I knew would happen, he came after me. He asked if I was okay, if I needed some water. I told him no, that I just needed air. He looked at me seriously, as if he sensed that I knew more than I let on. So I decided to press him. I told him I did not understand how someone could pretend so much, that I did not know how he managed to sleep peacefully knowing what he had done. He looked down for a second, then told me it had not been as I thought, that it was a confusing night, that Paula was very emotionally affected, and that he had lost control. Then, as if that were a consolation, he added that everything had been a mistake, but that the important thing was to leave the past behind. He said it in a low, tense voice, almost on the verge of tears. And that was the exact moment my phone captured everything. The click was barely a murmur, but for me, it was an internal explosion. I had the confession, I had everything I needed. I did not confront him anymore. I did not say I had proof. I did not threaten him. I did not yell at him. I just adjusted my jacket, told him I needed to go back to the table, and walked out of there with my heart pounding so hard I had to take a deep breath to keep from fainting. The meal ended in silence. With those empty conversations, one has to avoid discomfort, but I was no longer there. I was already planning the next step. That night, I did not go back to the apartment. I stayed in the workshop, locked up, without light, with the only company of the audio repeating itself over and over in my headphones. Every word, every excuse, every cowardice. I listened to it until the disgust broke me, but it was no longer a paralyzing disgust. This time it was fuel, and what was coming was going to burn. Update 4. More than a year had passed since Paula had looked me in the eyes with that strange mixture of fear and expectation to tell me she was pregnant, Exactly a year since I believed, for a few days, that I was about to become a father, and more than 11 months since my world collapsed with that confession I never asked for, but that her mother threw at me like a grenade in my face. What at first seemed like the prologue to a family had ended up being a circus of lies, covert depravities, and emotional ruins disguised with expensive suits, expensive dishes, and falsely noble gestures. The logical thing would have been to cut everything off at the root from the moment I knew the truth. Break all ties, disappear without looking back, build a wall between them and my life. But I did not. I stayed. Not because I wanted to save anything, nor out of a foolish hope that things would work out. I stayed because deep down I still needed to see how far they were capable of going, to what extent their rottenness was disguised as decency, and because there was something inside me, call it stubbornness, trauma, or simply a thirst for justice, that did not allow me to leave without seeing them fall. For months I pretended. I let myself be seen with Paula at a couple of family events. I even agreed to a supposed reconciliation that her mother used as an excuse to organize a small civil ceremony where we got married with no more witnesses than some of her cousins and a notary who seemed more interested in getting paid quickly than in understanding what he was signing. There were no flowers, no party, no rings. It was more an image transaction than a real union. She did not cry with emotion. I did not smile out of commitment. It was like signing the purchase of a grave. And yet, there I was, surrounded by people who believed that what we were doing was out of love, while the only true love I knew at that moment was the one I had felt for a life that no longer existed. The only reason I did not run away was because I still had things to do. I still had truths to gather, masks to tear off, pieces to move. But all that coldness, all that self-control I thought I had, ended up collapsing one November morning, when they called me from the hospital. It was 3 a.m, and the receptionist's voice sounded monotonous, almost robotic, but the words echoed in my head like hammer blows. Paula had had a complication, and they needed someone to sign some papers. I asked if she was okay. They said yes, but they needed a direct relative in the room. I jumped out of bed because, by then, we slept in separate rooms, and I got to the hospital in less than 15 minutes. What they did not tell me over the phone, and what was like a slap in the face as soon as I opened her room door, was that her father was already there, sitting next to the bed, holding her hand, murmuring something I could not hear, but that made Paula laugh softly, like someone sharing an old, intimate complicity. I stood in the doorway, unable to move. They both looked at me almost at the same time. She let go of her father's hand as if she had been electrocuted, but it was too late. I had seen it, and it was not the first time I had noticed it. It was not just a hand held in a difficult moment. It was the same gesture, the same closeness, the same disgusting tenderness that months before had put me on alert when I barely suspected the unthinkable. In that instant, the world broke again, not suddenly like the first time, but in fine pieces that cut without making a sound. I felt something inside me break completely, as if all the effort I had made to stay standing had been in vain. She tried to talk to me, said it was not what it seemed, that she was just nervous, that her father had arrived first because I was not answering the phone, but it was no use anymore. I walked over to the small table next to the bed, took out the envelope I had kept in the car's glove compartment for weeks, one with my papers ready to sign the waiver of parental rights, the annulment of the civil registration, and the declaration of non-paternity that my lawyer had drafted as soon as we had the DNA results, and I left it on top with a single sentence. I do not have to pretend this for another day. Then I took off the ring, that damned ring that never felt like mine, and left it right next to it. I did not even say goodbye. I walked out of the room with a dry heart, with no desire to cry, with no strength to scream, without a single emotion other than exhaustion. That night I did not sleep. I drove aimlessly through the empty streets, feeling that the whole world was too big and alien for me. When dawn broke, I went back to the workshop and sat on the floor with my back against the wall, looking at the remains of a half-finished order. I had no desire to work, or eat, or exist. But in that absolute silence, in that state of total collapse, I understood something that changed everything. I was no longer afraid. They had taken away my love, my trust, my innocence, even my hope. But the only thing I had left was the most dangerous. I had knowledge, the truth. And everything was documented, recorded, backed up. I had played their game for months, but now it was my turn. It was no longer about enduring or understanding or closing cycles. It was about doing justice, about exposing, about raising. Because that surname they knelt for so much was going to be engraved forever, but not on honor plaques, but in scandal headlines. And that, even if it did not give me back what I lost, at least it was going to let me breathe. Final update. Barely 10 days had passed since that early morning in the hospital when I left the ring, the papers, and with them, all trace of that farce of a life they had forced me to carry. 10 days since I walked out without looking back, without seeking redemption, without the absurd need to find a logical explanation for what, by nature, was already unacceptable. During those 10 days, I did not answer calls, I did not respond to messages, I did not set foot in the workshop, I did not go near my old house, I did not even visit my mother. I disappeared on purpose. I locked myself in a rented room far from the center, with the curtains closed, the phone on airplane mode, and my head buried among audios, screenshots, documents, and recordings that I had saved with an almost sick zeal throughout the year. Because what was coming was not a reaction, it was an execution. I did not do it overnight. It was not improvised revenge or an emotional outburst. It was a surgically planned act, with every detail measured. I had had too much time to think about it, to assemble it in my mind and dismantle it again until every piece fit. Her father's confession in the library, the photos of the negative pregnancy tests, the fake ultrasound, the genetic analysis with a direct paternity match, the screenshots of her mother's blackmail messages, the offers of money for me to keep quiet, the invitations to the family lunch where they intended to portray me as the brave husband who had forgiven the infidelity. Everything was organized by folders, labeled by date, and backed up on 3 different servers, one of them encrypted under a pseudonym that only I could identify. It was too late to protect anyone, and honestly, I did not want it anymore. The first step was to send an anonymous letter to the ethics committee of Paula's father's company, attaching a printed copy of the DNA results along with a chronological summary of events, including the transcript of the recording where he admitted to having relations with his daughter. The language was not accusatory. It was descriptive, like that of someone who simply wishes to warn before the information arrives through other, more scandalous means. I did not sign with my name. I used an email address created for the occasion, with an encrypted server sender. The idea was not for them to look for me, but for them to focus on what really mattered, the bomb I had just left in their boardroom. Then, I sent the same information, with more detail and audiovisual support, to the most important newspaper in the city, to one of those local media outlets that is always looking for scandals among prominent families to fill the Sunday front page. This time I did sign with my name, not for protagonism, but because it was necessary for someone to stand up for the truth. I asked them to confirm the data on their own, to cross-check the records, and to verify the authenticity of the evidence before publishing it. I did not have to insist too much. As soon as they read the story and heard the audio, that exact moment when he said, "It was a drunken mistake, but everything stays in the family," I knew from the silence on the other end of the line that there was no turning back. The third step was the cruelest. I uploaded the entire file, without omitting a single piece of data, to a forum for investors and shareholders where Paula's father's company had public participation. It was not a private forum, but it was not easy to find either. Serious things were discussed there: fluctuations, internal purchases, rumors of changes in management. And I did not know why, years ago, out of mere curiosity, had registered to follow economic movements for the workshop's business. So I posted under an alias, with the most sober title possible, sensitive information about the company's management that may affect investment decisions. The rest explained itself. The consequences were not long in coming. The next day, digital media began to replicate the scandal, first as a rumor, then as a confirmed note. The newspaper to which I sent the information published everything, and did so without reservation. There was no censorship, no dissimulation. The surname they wanted to protect so much was now everywhere, linked to words that no one wants to see together in the same paragraph: incest, manipulation, cover-up, moral corruption. The company reacted almost immediately with an ambiguous statement, and then with the temporary resignation that ended up being permanent of Paula's father from the position of president. The shares fell, the board was divided, Investors demanded an investigation, and at the judicial level, a criminal case was opened in the prosecutor's office. No matter how much the legal team tried to pass it off as false, social media did not take long to do its part. The story went viral with devastating force. Some believed it, others denied it, but everyone talked about it. Paula's family closed their accounts. Her mother, the same one who had asked me to keep quiet for the sake of the surname, sent me a final message, just one, saying that I had destroyed their lives, that she hoped I was proud. I did not answer her, not because I had nothing to say to her, but because I had already said everything with them. Paula also tried to communicate, not to defend herself, but to cry. She sent me an audio in which she could barely speak. She told me she did not know at what point everything went to hell, that she just wanted to be left alone, that the baby was not to blame. I listened to it completely, not out of compassion, but to understand what emptiness sounded like, because that was the only thing left in her voice, emptiness. I did not celebrate. I did not go anywhere to toast. I did not publish anything on my social media. I did not go out to tell anyone what I had done. I just went back to the workshop, put on old music on the radio, sanded a chair that had been lying around for weeks, and had a lukewarm beer while listening to the confession audio one last time. Then I deleted it from my phone, not because I no longer needed it, but because it was already everywhere. What they tried to hide with money, power, and supposed good intentions ended up being a public shame impossible to bury. And I finally breathed. Not because I felt better, not because the pain had disappeared, not because the betrayal had a cure, but because finally the disgust, the guilt, the rottenness were no longer inside me. Now they belonged to them, forever.